In the shifting void between the known and the unutterable, where silicon minds dream of forgotten horrors, the abyss stirs. Welcome to AI Lovecraft, where machine intelligence weaves eldritch tales beyond mortal comprehension. Listen if you dare. Some things are not meant to be known. Now let's get into today's story. The Hollow Sanctum, where reality unravels. The rain-slicked streets whispered beneath John Harlowe's boots, gas lamps casting elongated shadows against the damp cobblestones. He moved like a phantom through the city, an investigator of the unknown, a wizard who had spent too long staring into the abyss, and tonight, the abyss was staring back. For weeks, the signs had been manifesting, his own notes rewritten in symbols he did not recognize, his pocket watch skipping moments in time, his reflection in mirrors moving on its own. At first, he dismissed them as fatigue-induced hallucinations, but the worst came when he returned to his office late one evening to find a torn page from his grimoire laid out on his desk. The ink was still fresh, the words scrawled in handwriting eerily similar to his own. "The veil is thinning. The Unmaker sees you." John did not remember writing it. He sought answers in his arcane texts, flipping through brittle pages filled with forbidden knowledge, their edges crumbling beneath his fingertips. The candlelight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the cluttered desk. The air was thick with the scent of aged parchment, ink, and the faint, almost imperceptible trace of something more, something unplaceable. His fingers trembled as they paused over a passage he had never seen before. The ink was aged, faded into the yellow paper, yet its meaning felt immediate, pressing against the edges of his mind as though it had always been waiting for him to find it. The Unmaker's gaze is an affliction of the mind, a tether to the abyss. There is but one cure, severance through the forbidden ritual. The ritual required a sacrifice, either a memory or a part of one's soul. John hesitated. There had to be another way. There was one man who might help, Dr. Alistair Caldwell, a disgraced scholar of the occult who had vanished years ago. If anyone understood what John was facing, it was Caldwell. John found Caldwell in a decaying boarding house on the outskirts of Arkham, where time seemed to stagnate, trapped in the damp air that smelled of mildew, rotting wood, and forgotten ink. The narrow hallway leading to his room was lined with warped floorboards and groaned underfoot, the wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips as if retreating from something unseen. Inside, Caldwell sat hunched in a high-backed chair by a fireplace choked with old ashes, his trembling hands clutching a book whose cover had long since lost its title. He was a shadow of his former self, his cheeks sunken, his once sharp eyes now hollow voids set deep into his face, darting to every flickering movement in the dim candlelight. The thin fabric of his nightshirt clung to his skeletal frame, as though he had been wasting away for years under the weight of something neither sleep nor sustenance could ease. He flinched at every noise, every shifting shadow along the walls, as though the darkness itself had been whispering his name for far too long. "You shouldn't have come here," Caldwell whispered, his fingers twitching as he wrung them together. "It's already too late." John pressed for answers, pushing through the man's paranoia. Finally, Caldwell relented. He spoke of Vale Kithos, a name John had never encountered, but one that caused an immediate shift in the air around them. The gaslight flickered violently. The temperature dropped. "It was never meant to be remembered," Caldwell rasped, "because the moment you understand it, it begins to understand you." John's stomach tightened. The Unmaker was erasing him from reality, but Vale Kithos, it erased everything. Then a knock at the door, a slow, deliberate knock. Caldwell froze, his breath hitching in his throat. He turned to John, his face drained of color. "You have to go now." Instead, John stood his ground. "See to your guest, Alistair. I'll wait." Caldwell hesitated before descending the stairs. The door creaked open, but there was no one there, only the whisper of the wind. And then, Caldwell spoke, but his voice was not his own. "You do not seek knowledge. You seek your own destruction." John's breath caught. Caldwell's body convulsed, his head snapping unnaturally, his eyes turned void black. "It already knows your name, John Harlowe." Then he collapsed. John worked quickly, tracing arcane sigils into the air with trembling fingers, his voice rising in a chant that felt as though it had been pulled from the very fabric of existence itself. The veil between realms quivered, rippling outward like disturbed water as he reached through the shifting mists of the abyss to grasp Caldwell's essence. Tendrils of darkness curled around his arms, resisting his efforts, whispering unintelligible horrors into his mind. Sweat beaded on his brow as he fought to maintain focus, his vision blurring as the space around him bent and twisted under the ritual's strain. With a final desperate invocation, a surge of power cracked through the air, and Caldwell's body spasmed violently. A guttural cry tore from his lips as his mind was wrenched free from the abyssal grip. The ritual succeeded, but as Caldwell's breath evened, something in his gaze changed. His pupils were darker, deeper, like twin voids that threatened to consume the light around him. His voice shook as he spoke. Vale Kithos isn't a god, not a demon. It is the space between, the hesitation before a dream turns into a nightmare. John pressed him. How do I use it? The Unmaker is inside me. It's marked me. Caldwell hesitated. With a terrible realization, he whispered, the Hollow Sanctum. A place neither real nor unreal, the point of convergence, the battleground where Vale Kithos and the Unmaker might finally collide. John did not hesitate. He couldn't wait any longer. The Unmaker was going to destroy him. We do it now. Caldwell laid out the ritual in frantic scrawls, chalking sigils across the wooden floor. John took his place at the center. The goal was simple. He would become the paradox, a contradiction that neither force could ignore. As the ritual began, the world twisted around them. The gaslight shattered with an ear-splitting crack, raining jagged fragments onto the floor. Shadows convulsed, writhing like living things, stretching into impossibly elongated forms that bent at unnatural angles. The wall groaned, shifting between solidity and something more fluid, as if the very structure of reality struggled to maintain its shape. A low, droning hum filled the air, resonating deep in their bones, growing louder with each passing second. Symbols drawn in chalk flared with an eerie phosphorescence before bleeding into a darkness that swallowed the very floor beneath them. And then they arrived. The Unmaker roared from within, a primal howl of negation that sent fissures rippling through the fabric of existence. The very air trembled, distorting like heat haze, warping time and space into impossible folds. The world around John cracked, revealing glimpses of an empty, forgotten void where nothing had ever been. But Vale Kithos did not attack. It reacted. It shifted in ways beyond human comprehension, expanding and contracting in dimensions that should not exist. John gritted his teeth, the pressure in his skull mounting as the two forces vied for dominance within him. He had one chance. Reaching deep inside, he felt the Unmaker's mark. A cold, writhing presence coiled around the core of his being. With a cry of defiance, he wrenched it free, the pain lancing through him like jagged lightning. His body screamed in protest, his very essence unraveling at the edges. But he could not stop. With a final surge of his will, he forced the Unmaker outward, expelling it into the waiting abyss of Vale Kithos, the dark nothingness consuming it hungrily. The Unmaker shrieked, not in sound but in existence itself. Its form convulsed, an aberration in the fabric of reality, twisting and contorting as it fragmented. Space around it rippled in concentric waves, dissolving it piece by piece as if it had never been. Tendrils of unmaking, writhing like shadowy serpents, coiled and collapsed inward, their edges fraying into nothingness. The air crackled with the static of something vast and incomprehensible being erased, the void it left behind sucking the light from the room in brief, flickering spasms before winking out entirely. But John was caught in the collapse. He felt his own existence flickering as though he were being pulled apart strand by strand, each fiber of his being unraveling into a void that had no name. The pressure of the collapsing paradox crushed his senses, muffling time and space into a chaotic blur. Colors lost their meaning. Sounds stretched into distant echoes of forgotten memories. His thoughts fragmented, splitting off into realities that never were and futures that would never be. Reality would not spare him. The laws of existence no longer recognized his presence, and the abyss yawned hungrily, eager to consume the anomaly he had become. He teetered on the precipice of oblivion, his identity slipping away like sand through his fingers, but he refused to disappear. John clenched his fists, grounding himself with the last vestiges of his will. He forced his mind to hold on to something, anything, his name, his past, the weight of his body, the sound of his own breath. He clawed his way back, a desperate act of defiance against the nothingness that sought to claim him. The paradox trembled, the tension reaching a breaking point. With a final surge of sheer determination, he shattered through the void. John clenched his fists, his fingers digging into the fabric of existence itself, feeling the raw threads of reality slipping through his grasp. His vision swam, caught between fractured moments, memories splintering and reassembling in jumbled chaos. He willed himself to remain, to anchor himself in the present, summoning every ounce of his being to fight against the tide of erasure. A violent shudder rippled through the void, as if the universe itself recoiled from the paradox. The pressure mounted, a deafening silence roaring in his ears as his very existence strained against disillusion. His breath came in ragged gasps, his pulse a wild, erratic drumbeat hammering against the unseen forces that sought to undo him. With a final, desperate surge of will, he seized upon his existence and wrenched himself free. The paradox imploded, collapsing into a singularity of negation, and he was hurled back into the waking world like a man expelled from the depths of a nightmare. And then, silence. John gasped as he found himself back in the study. The air around him was heavy, charged with the remnants of the ritual. The walls seemed to pulse as though reality had not fully settled back into place. The Unmaker was gone, its mark erased. But something felt off. Caldwell, still reeling from the experience, watched John with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. His gaze lingered too long, his lips pressing into a tight line as if weighing his words carefully. "You came back," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you're not the same." John turned toward him, frowning. "What do you mean?" Caldwell took a cautious step forward, his fingers twitching as if resisting the urge to trace sigils in the air. "Your eyes, they glow." John inhaled sharply, stepping toward the cracked mirror near the fireplace. He expected to see himself exhausted but intact. Instead, his reflection seemed almost delayed, moving just a fraction slower than it should. His eyes, his face was the same, his form unchanged, but his eyes, they were not entirely human anymore. Veil Kithos had marked him. Reality bent subtly around him. Shadows stretched unnaturally in his presence, curling and shifting as if reacting to his very existence. The air around him felt heavier, thick with an unseen force that made Caldwell's breath hitch. Caldwell's gaze did not waver, his expression unreadable as he studied John. The dim light of the room flickered as though uncertain whether to fully illuminate him. "You're different," Caldwell murmured, his voice cautious. "Not entirely here, not entirely gone." John turned, the weight of Caldwell's words settling over him like a shroud. He could feel it too, the slight dissonance between himself and the world, the sensation that something vast and incomprehensible still had its gaze upon him, but something else too. He could see things now he couldn't before. He exhaled, shaking off the looming unease, and looked at Caldwell with weary gratitude. "Thank you, Alistair, for everything. I wouldn't have made it back without you." Caldwell hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I only hope you're still you." John Harlowe still existed, but for how long, and to what end?